Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
Murder and Mystery in America. Chapter 1, The Blood on Main Street. The fog hung low over Chicago's Main Street that cold March morning in 1867, muffling the clatter of carriage wheels and swallowing the glow of gas lamps until the city seemed a dreamscape of shadow and smoke. It was in this pale gloom that the body of Silas McGraw, banker and respected man of business, was discovered sprawled on the cobblestones in front of his office. His silk top hat lay a few feet away, crushed underfoot, and his blood spread in a widening pool that seeped into the cracks of the street like spilled ink across a ledger. News traveled faster than the police. By the time the authorities cordoned the area, a crowd had already gathered, merchants, clerks, curious children, and idlers drawn by the scent of tragedy. They whispered in hushed tones, passing rumor as if it were coin, a mugging gone wrong, a political execution, perhaps even revenge for debts unpaid. The city, restless and ambitious, thrived on gossip as much as it did on steel and railroads. It was amid this circle of speculation that a familiar figure arrived, Allan Pinkerton, his heavy coat buttoned tight, his sharp eyes scanning the scene with the detached precision of a surgeon. To the public, Pinkerton was already a legend, the man who foiled plots, broke gangs, and protected presidents. To those who worked with him, he was more formidable still, a man who combined relentless logic with an unyielding moral code. The police sergeant on duty tipped his hat nervously. "Mr. Pinkerton. Didn't expect you so soon." "I was summoned," Pinkerton replied curtly, kneeling by the corpse. He adjusted the brim of his hat, blocking out the gaslight's glare, and examined the body. A single bullet wound to the chest. Powder burns darkened the fabric, close range. Yet there was something too deliberate about it. Pinkerton's fingers brushed the banker's jacket pocket. The man's watch remained, his purse intact. Not a robbery, then. Something far more calculated. "Witnesses?" Pinkerton asked. The sergeant gestured toward the crowd. A few claimed they saw a cloaked figure running into the fog. Nothing more. Pinkerton stood, brushing the dust from his gloves. Nothing more is often enough, if properly examined. "Bring me the witnesses." Separately. The first, a young errand boy, swore he had seen a tall man in a dark cloak fleeing toward the alley behind the theater. The second, a washerwoman, insisted it was a short, limping figure. The third claimed 2 men had been present. Pinkerton listened without interruption, his face unreadable, only occasionally tapping his notebook with the end of his pencil. He knew human memory was a fickle instrument, prone to invention. Yet from contradictions truth could be drawn. The washerwoman's account troubled him least, her vantage point, a window blurred by steam, made error inevitable. The errand boy, however, described the fleeing man with unusual detail, the length of the cloak, the glint of a silver-handled cane. This was not invention. It was the observation of youth, sharp and unclouded by fear. Pinkerton dismissed them and turned his attention to the street itself. The cobblestones told their own tale. A faint drag mark led from the bank's doorway to the spot where McGraw lay. He had been pulled, positioned, why? For display, or to suggest a false scene. Nearby, in the gutter, Pinkerton spotted a scrap of fabric, fine wool, dark, with a faint scent of tobacco smoke. He tucked it into an envelope. By late morning, the crowd dispersed, leaving only Pinkerton, the police, and the body now bound for the morgue. As he stood in the thinning fog, a carriage drew up. From it descended a man of imposing stature, wrapped in a military-style greatcoat. His eyes darted about, sharp yet uneasy. "Mr. Pinkerton," he said, voice low. "I am Charles Duval, associate to the late Mr. McGraw. I must speak with you privately." Pinkerton studied him briefly. The man's gloved hand twitched at his side, betraying nervousness. "Very well. Walk with me." They moved away from the blood-stained street toward a quieter corner where the rumble of commerce softened. Duval cleared his throat. McGraw was a friend, he said. But he was also a man of many enemies. He dealt in land, railways, properties, speculation. Not all of it clean. There are those who might wish him silenced. Pinkerton's gaze narrowed. "And you? Where do you fit into these affairs?" Duval hesitated. "I was his partner in certain ventures. I will not deny it. But I am no murderer." He glanced about before leaning closer. "Have you heard of the man called the Colonel? Rumors abound. McGraw had dealings with him, though he seldom spoke of them openly. Last week they quarreled bitterly. I fear this may be the consequence." Pinkerton made a note. The Colonel. An ominous sobriquet, common among ex-soldiers who had turned their wartime ruthlessness toward profit in peace. Such men littered the cities after the Civil War, their scars, both visible and invisible, often finding expression in violence. "Your honesty is noted," Pinkerton said, his tone giving nothing away. "But beware, Mr. Duval. Should your honesty falter, I will know." Duval stiffened, nodded curtly, and took his leave. Pinkerton watched him go, filing away every twitch and hesitation for later judgment. By evening, Pinkerton returned to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency office, a modest building buzzing with the quiet industry of his operatives. Reports lay in neat stacks, maps of the city pinned to the wall marked the movement of known criminals. At his desk, under lamplight, he spread the evidence, the fabric scrap, his notes on witness accounts, and the name, the Colonel. He drew a line from McGraw's name to Duval's, then another branching to the Colonel. A web began to take shape. In Pinkerton's method, no fact was too small, no rumor too insignificant. All were threads in the tapestry of truth. At that moment, his trusted lieutenant, George Bangs, entered. "Word from the South Docks," Bangs said. A man matching the boy's description was seen boarding a skiff bound for the river. Cloak, silver cane, the works. Pinkerton's eyes glinted. "Then our shadow is flesh after all. Tomorrow, we follow the river. But tonight, we set watchers at every gambling house and theater. The Colonel will not remain hidden long." He leaned back, pipe smoke curling about his head, as the city's noises echoed faintly through the office windows. Outside, Chicago bustled, restless, blind to the storm of conspiracy already unfolding. For Pinkerton, the case was no longer merely about a dead banker. It was about power, corruption, and the unseen hand that sought to rule the city from the shadows. And Allan Pinkerton, hunter of secrets, would not rest until that hand was forced into the light. Chapter 2, Whispers in the Alley. The following morning broke with a chill rain that washed the soot from Chicago's streets but did nothing to cleanse the unease that hung in the air. Pinkerton rose before dawn, as was his habit, and by the time the city stirred he was already at his desk, reviewing reports. He believed in striking swiftly, before rumor hardened into false certainty and before suspects slipped beyond reach. George Bangs entered with fresh intelligence. Operatives stationed by the docks observed activity near the old warehouse district. A cloaked man, tall, bearing a cane, was seen speaking with a group of roughs last night. They dispersed before we could close in. Pinkerton frowned. Roughs can be hired by any purse. It is the employer we seek. Still, this confirms our witness was not a child spinning tales. He tapped his pencil against the name scrawled in his notes, the Colonel. By mid-morning, Pinkerton strode into the rain-slick streets, coat collar turned up against the wind. Two operatives followed at a discreet distance. His destination was a narrow alley off State Street, known for its taverns where information flowed more freely than liquor. The alley reeked of stale beer, horse dung, and desperation. Gas lamps sputtered weakly in the damp, their glow barely piercing the fog that clung to the brick walls. Pinkerton entered the Iron Horse Tavern, where gamblers, ex-soldiers, and laborers sought warmth. His presence drew stares, some wary, some openly hostile. Pinkerton's reputation was as much a shield as his revolver, many criminals knew his face and feared it. He took a seat at the bar, ordered coffee, he never touched spirits while working, and waited. Patience was a detective's ally. Within minutes, the bartender, a broad-shouldered man with a scar down his cheek, shuffled over. "You ain't the usual sort we see here, mister," he said. "No," Pinkerton replied evenly. "And I imagine I am not the man you hope to see today either. But you will speak to me." The bartender scowled but poured the coffee. "What is it you're after?" "A man called the Colonel," Pinkerton said, his voice low enough that only the barman heard. "You've heard of him." The man froze a fraction of a second, confirmation enough. He busied himself wiping the counter. "Rumors, nothing more." Pinkerton leaned in, his eyes steady as iron. "Rumors have roots. Speak plainly, and you may avoid entanglement when justice comes calling." The bartender sighed, then muttered, "They say the Colonel fought in the war. Kentucky regiment, maybe. Lost men, lost fortune. Came north after Appomattox, built himself a circle of toughs. Keeps to the gambling dens and back rooms. Never seen without his cane. Some say the handle hides a blade." Pinkerton absorbed the information silently, then pushed a coin across the bar. "If he returns here, you'll send word to my agency. Quickly." The bartender's eyes flickered to the coin, then back to Pinkerton's unyielding stare. He nodded. Pinkerton rose, leaving the tavern for the damp street. A ragged figure loitered nearby, a newsboy no older than 12. He tugged at Pinkerton's sleeve. "Mister, you lookin' for the Colonel?" "I seen him, I did." Pinkerton crouched, his face softening just enough to reassure. "Tell me." "Behind the Lyceum Theater, 2 nights ago. He was talkin' to a banker-lookin' gent. The gent gave him a package, and the Colonel, he said something like, 'This ledger'll bury you if you cross me.' Then they went separate ways." The boy's eyes shone with the thrill of sharing forbidden knowledge. Pinkerton pressed a silver dime into his palm. "You've done well. Speak of this to no one else." The mention of a ledger tightened the strands of the case. McGraw's missing account book, perhaps. If the Colonel held it, then motive became clear. Control through blackmail, or silence through murder. Either way, the truth was coalescing. Pinkerton sent his operatives to shadow the Lyceum Theater while he paid a visit to McGraw's bank. Inside, the clerks bustled nervously under the shadow of their employer's death. Pinkerton asked to see McGraw's office. The room was neat, though Pinkerton's trained eye caught subtle signs of intrusion. A drawer lock forced. Papers rifled hastily. Yet one document had escaped notice, a letter tucked beneath the blotter. He slid it free. The letter, unsigned, read. "Silas. The Colonel grows impatient. Deliver the ledger at once, or expect retribution. Your schemes are known to more than me. Delay will cost you dearly." The hand was bold, confident, unafraid of exposure. Pinkerton folded the letter carefully. It was damning proof of pressure upon McGraw. But who else knew of these schemes? Duval had hinted at shady dealings, yet had omitted mention of this direct threat. Deliberate concealment, or ignorance? Either could be dangerous. Leaving the bank, Pinkerton returned to the alley district. Word traveled quickly, too quickly, and soon a thin man with ink-stained fingers approached. A clerk, by the look of him, but with eyes that darted like a rat's. "Mr. Pinkerton," he whispered, "I can tell you where the colonel meets his men. But it'll cost you." Pinkerton regarded him coolly. "Truth is its own reward, sir. Speak freely, or I may assume your silence marks you complicit." The man paled, then stammered, "The warehouse by the river, number 17. He meets there after dark. But beware, they post guards." Pinkerton inclined his head. "Then I thank you for your honesty. Pray you maintain it." That evening, rain still falling in thin sheets, Pinkerton and Bangs positioned themselves in shadow across from the warehouse. From within came the murmur of voices, the clink of glass, the scrape of chairs. At intervals, men entered or departed, each hard-eyed, armed, and cautious. Midnight drew near. At last, a tall figure emerged, cloak billowing, cane gleaming under the lamplight. Even from a distance, his bearing was unmistakable, proud, martial, commanding. The colonel. He paused, scanned the street with hawk's eyes, then strode into the night. Pinkerton's instincts urged him to follow, but the risk of exposure was high. Instead, he memorized the man's gait, his mannerisms. These details would prove invaluable when the time came to confront him. As the colonel vanished into fog, Pinkerton whispered to Bangs, "This is no common thug. He commands respect, and fear. To break him, we must first unravel the web that shields him." They slipped away unseen, their minds already shaping the next move. For Pinkerton knew that every shadow whispered secrets, and in those whispers lay the path to justice. Chapter 3, The Banker's Ledger. The rain had eased by morning, leaving the streets of Chicago slick with mud and the sky a pale, washed-out gray. Pinkerton rose early, his pipe smoke curling against the window as he reviewed the scraps of evidence gathered thus far. The puzzle was forming, though many pieces still lay scattered in shadows. McGraw's murder, the colonel's shadowy figure, the whispered thread of a ledger, all threads of a larger tapestry. Pinkerton believed that crime, like commerce, thrived on records. Greed demanded accounts, debts, ledgers. If McGraw had been silenced, it was not with a bullet alone, but with ink and paper hidden somewhere in the city. By mid-morning he arrived once more at McGraw's bank. The clerks glanced nervously at him as he strode through the hall with its marble counters and ticking brass clocks. He demanded access to McGraw's private office again, this time with the authority of the coroner's warrant. The office smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. The drawers had been hastily rifled, as Pinkerton had noticed the day before, but he now conducted a meticulous search. He inspected behind bookshelves, under floorboards, inside the false bottoms of drawers. Nothing. Whoever had searched before him was thorough. Still, criminals were rarely as clever as they imagined. Pinkerton's eye caught a faint scuff mark beside the hearth. He knelt, probing with a knife until a panel shifted. Behind it lay a shallow recess. Empty, but lined with the dust outline of a book recently removed. The missing ledger. "Bangs," Pinkerton called, summoning his lieutenant who waited outside. "We are chasing a ledger, stolen from here within days of the murder. It contained names, debts, perhaps evidence of fraud. Whoever possesses it holds power over men like McGraw." Bangs frowned. "Then the colonel has it, as the boy claimed." "Perhaps," Pinkerton said. "But the colonel is too careful to carry such dynamite himself. He would pass it to an intermediary until the time was right to use it." Pinkerton turned his attention to McGraw's correspondence. Among mundane bills and contracts he found a slip of paper torn from a larger document. On it, only initials remained, L.M. He studied the bold script, the sweep of the letters. It was written by a confident hand. "L.M.," Bangs murmured. "A partner? A rival? Or a patron?" Pinkerton replied grimly. "These initials may belong to the true power behind McGraw's death. The colonel may be but a weapon, wielded by another." That afternoon, Pinkerton interviewed McGraw's clerks. Most offered little but stammering loyalty. Yet one, a timid young man named Henry, revealed more than he intended. I only kept the accounts as Mr. McGraw instructed," Henry said, hands trembling. "But there were transactions, unusual ones. Large sums moving between the bank and the city council. Bribes, I think. He warned me never to speak of them." Pinkerton pressed. "Did you ever hear him mention an LM?" Henry hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. He often met a gentleman by that name. Always in secret, late at night. I never saw his face, but I once overheard McGraw call him Alderman Merrick." Pinkerton's mind sharpened at once. Lyman Merrick, a respected alderman of Chicago's council, known for his silver tongue and tireless charity work. To the public he was a civic leader, to Pinkerton he was now a suspect. "Good lad," Pinkerton said, leaving Henry pale but relieved. "You have aided justice." That evening, Pinkerton attended a council gathering at the Palmer House, where Merrick was certain to appear. The Grand Hotel buzzed with politicians and businessmen drinking to prosperity. Amid the crowd, Merrick stood tall, his beard neatly trimmed, his laughter booming. To any ordinary eye he was the picture of civic pride. Pinkerton watched quietly from the edge of the hall. He noted Merrick's gestures, commanding, assured. He observed how others deferred to him, how even rival politicians sought his favor. This was no mere alderman. This was a man accustomed to power, a man who could employ the colonel to do his bidding. Later, Pinkerton slipped into the coatroom where Merrick's greatcoat hung. With careful hands he searched the pockets. There he found a folded note, unsigned, but the script matched the torn slip from McGraw's desk. It read, "The ledger must be secured. McGraw has grown unreliable. Ensure our colonel is reminded of his duty." Pinkerton replaced the note precisely as he had found it. Proof enough to confirm his suspicion, though not yet sufficient to bring Merrick down. For that, the ledger itself must be recovered. Leaving the hotel, Pinkerton and Bangs walked through the mist-laden streets. "Merrick hides behind respectability," Pinkerton said. "But he is at the center. The colonel is his sword. The ledger is his shield. Remove both, and the edifice crumbles." They turned down an alley near the Lyceum Theater, intending to circle back to their office. From the shadows emerged two figures. Pistols glinted in the lamplight. "Pinkerton," one snarled. "You meddle too far. Leave the colonel be, or you'll meet McGraw's fate." Without hesitation, Pinkerton drew his revolver. Bangs did likewise. For a tense heartbeat, rain dripped from the eaves as four men stood locked in deadly tableau. Then the assailants broke, firing wildly before fleeing into the fog. Bullets sparked against brick, but Pinkerton and Bangs held their ground. "They were sent to frighten us," Bangs muttered. "Or to silence us," Pinkerton corrected, holstering his weapon. "But they failed. Which means Merrick grows anxious. We must press harder." The next day Pinkerton dispatched operatives across the city, some to infiltrate gambling dens, others to shadow Merrick's allies, others still to trace shipments along the river. Slowly, fragments accumulated. A warehouse rented in a false name. Shipments of strongboxes moved at odd hours. Men paid to look away. By evening, a clearer picture emerged. The ledger was believed to be hidden at the Lyceum Theater itself, guarded until Merrick deemed it useful. Perhaps McGraw had attempted to retrieve it, leading to his death. Pinkerton resolved to act. "Tonight," he told Bangs, "we go to the theater. Quietly. If the ledger is there, we seize it. If Merrick's men resist, they will find we are not so easily cowed." The Lyceum stood grand against the night, its gaslit facade glowing through the mist. Inside, actors rehearsed upon the stage, their voices echoing in the empty hall. Pinkerton and Bangs moved unseen, slipping through backstage corridors. At last, in a dusty storage room beneath the stage, Pinkerton found a locked chest. The lock bore fresh scratches, opened and closed in haste. He forced it quietly. Inside lay papers bound in leather, McGraw's ledger. Pinkerton leafed through its pages. Names leapt out, councilmen, businessmen, even judges. All had received bribes or paid illicit sums. This was dynamite, enough to topple half the city's elite. But before he could secure it, footsteps echoed in the corridor. A door creaked. A shadow fell across the room. Pinkerton, a voice drawled, deep and mocking. I wondered when you'd come sniffing. The colonel stepped into the lamplight, cloak draped, cane gleaming. His eyes burned with cold amusement. And in that moment, Pinkerton knew the hunt was about to turn deadly. Chapter 4, A Shadow in the Theater. The colonel's presence filled the cramped storage room as surely as the damp air and the flickering lamplight. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a cloak that seemed woven from the very fog of the city, he leaned on his silver-headed cane as though it were a scepter of command. Pinkerton recognized the type immediately, a man forged in war, hardened by loss, and now feeding on the corruption of peace. So, the colonel drawled, his voice carrying a southern lilt sharpened into menace, the great Allan Pinkerton prowls about in shadows, rummaging in chests like a common thief. Tell me, did you expect to walk away with that book? Pinkerton remained calm, slipping the ledger back into the chest but not relocking it. His revolver rested at his side, though his hand did not move toward it. I expected to find the truth, Colonel. And here it lies, ink upon paper, the record of men who traded honor for coin. You guard it well, but even you cannot protect it forever. The colonel's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained fixed. Truth is a matter of who holds the pen. That book is mine now, and it keeps certain gentlemen in my debt. You meddle in affairs that will break you, detective. Bangs, who had remained at Pinkerton's shoulder, shifted subtly, his revolver half raised. He talks too much, Bangs muttered. The colonel raised his cane slightly, as if signaling. From the doorway stepped two armed men, pistols gleaming. Pinkerton did not flinch. He had expected as much. Walk out quiet, the colonel said. Leave the ledger. Forget McGraw's corpse. Do that, and you live. Resist, and you die here beneath the stage, your bones rattling with the actors' applause. Pinkerton's voice cut through the threat, cool and sharp. You may command brutes and bullies, Colonel, but you do not command me. Chicago is not a battlefield to be conquered, and I am not a soldier you can intimidate. He tipped the lamp suddenly, plunging the room into shadows. Gunfire cracked, the muzzle flashes illuminating chaos. Bangs fired back, striking one of the thugs who fell against the chest with a groan. Pinkerton shoved the lamp base across the floor, sparks scattering, then seized the ledger and darted toward the side door. The colonel barked an order. His remaining man lunged, but Pinkerton's fist struck true, sending him sprawling. Bangs covered the retreat as Pinkerton burst into the corridor, ledger under his arm. Behind them, the colonel's voice rang with fury. You'll hang for this, Pinkerton. The city itself will see to it. They fled through the bowels of the theater, emerging into the wings of the great stage where rehearsals still carried on. Actors in costume froze mid-scene as two armed detectives dashed across, pursued by shadowy figures. A pistol shot echoed, striking sparks from the set. Gasps rippled through the performers as Pinkerton leapt from the stage into the empty seats, sprinting toward the exit. In the alley outside, rain fell harder now, pounding against cobblestones. Pinkerton and Bangs ducked into shadow as the colonel's men spilled out behind them. Shots cracked again, echoing off brick. One bullet shattered a lamppost glass, plunging the street into deeper gloom. Split. Pinkerton barked. Regroup at the agency. They parted, Pinkerton darting down a narrow passage that reeked of garbage and coal smoke. He clutched the ledger tight, every sense alive with danger. Twice he glanced back, catching glimpses of cloaked pursuers. The colonel himself, perhaps, or merely his hounds. At last, Pinkerton emerged into the bustle of State Street, where crowds of evening strollers and carriages provided cover. He slowed his stride, blending in, until he reached the agency's door. Inside, safe for the moment, he set the ledger on his desk with a sigh of grim satisfaction. Bangs arrived minutes later, winded but unharmed. "They'll come for it," he said, eyes fixed on the book. "Of course," Pinkerton replied. "And that is precisely what we require." He opened the ledger, turning its heavy pages under the lamplight. Names and figures leapt from the paper: councilmen, judges, businessmen, all implicated in bribes and fraud. Among them appeared Lyman Merrick's name again and again, tied to vast sums. "This," Pinkerton murmured, "is the dagger at Merrick's heart." And McGraw was slain because he wavered in loyalty. Bangs leaned closer. "Then Merrick ordered the murder, through the colonel." "Likely," Pinkerton said. "But likelihood is not proof. We must catch them in the act of wielding this ledger as weapon." The following days brought tension. Pinkerton's operatives reported movements: Merrick seen meeting discreetly with allies in taverns, the colonel vanishing for hours into the river district, whispers of bribes prepared for city officials to dismiss the investigation. The noose was tightening, yet around whom? One evening, as Pinkerton studied the ledger once more, a note was delivered under his office door. No signature, only scrawled words. "You hold what is not yours. Return it to the theater at midnight, alone, or pay in blood." Pinkerton examined the hand, bold, confident, the same as the letters found in McGraw's office. Merrick himself. At last, he had made a move. At midnight, Pinkerton approached the Lyceum Theatre once more, the ledger tucked beneath his arm. Bangs and a cadre of operatives shadowed him at a distance, prepared for the trap. Inside the darkened hall, a single lamp burned upon the stage. There stood the colonel, cloak spread wide, cane gleaming like a blade. Merrick himself waited in the wings, his face pale but resolute. "You are a fool to come," Merrick said softly. "Give me the ledger, and you may yet live." Pinkerton's voice carried clearly across the empty seats. "No, alderman. Tonight you reveal yourself for what you are, a thief of public trust, a murderer by proxy. Chicago will see you unmasked." The colonel snarled and raised his cane. From the shadows, more armed men stepped forth. But at that instant, Pinkerton's operatives burst from the aisles, revolvers drawn. The theater erupted in chaos, gunfire cracking, shouts echoing, the actors painted backdrops riddled with holes. In the melee, one of Merrick's guards fell, clutching his chest. Another surrendered, dropping his weapon. Bangs grappled with a thug near the orchestra pit, sending him tumbling into the dark void below. Pinkerton himself stood firm, the ledger clutched in one hand, his revolver leveled with the other. "Surrender, Colonel," he shouted. But the colonel laughed, a harsh bark, and vanished into the wings. A shot rang out, narrowly missing Pinkerton's head. By the time the operatives gave chase, the colonel had disappeared into the labyrinth of back corridors, leaving only the echo of his laughter behind. When the smoke cleared, Merrick lay in custody, pale and trembling, his veneer of dignity stripped away. But the colonel had escaped, and his shadow still lingered over the city. Pinkerton closed the ledger, his eyes hard. "We have the book. We have Merrick. But until the colonel is in chains, the danger remains." And thus, beneath the shattered rafters of the Lyceum Theatre, the case deepened, promising blood and betrayal yet to come. Chapter 5, A Web of Deceit. The arrest of Alderman Lyman Merrick sent tremors through Chicago's political halls. By dawn, newspapers carried the sensational headline, "Prominent Councilman Arrested in Murder Conspiracy." Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, jeering or defending Merrick depending on their allegiance. Yet Allan Pinkerton knew the arrest, though dramatic, was only one strand of a larger net. The colonel remained at large, and his shadowy influence still poisoned the city. In his office, Pinkerton studied the ledger with Bangs at his side. The book was a trove of corruption, bribes exchanged for contracts, false land deeds, payments to gangs for intimidation. But most telling of all were the repeated entries under the initials CR, large sums paid to an unnamed recipient. Pinkerton suspected these were the Colonel's earnings, laundered through Merrick's accounts. "The ledger proves Merrick's guilt," Bang said, "but the Colonel is the arm that carried out the killing. Until he is caught, Merrick may claim innocence, that he was framed by rivals." "Precisely," Pinkerton replied, tapping the page with his pencil. "To bring true justice, we must bind the Colonel to Merrick with iron chains of proof. And for that, we must draw him into the open." The following night, Pinkerton convened a quiet meeting in the agency's back room with 3 of his most trusted operatives. He spread a map of the city across the table, pointing to warehouses, taverns, and river docks. "The Colonel is clever," Pinkerton explained, "but no man of violence can resist parading his strength. He needs allies, lieutenants, places to gather. We will infiltrate them all. Watch for coded messages, shipments of coin, and sudden disappearances of witnesses." The operatives nodded, each assigned their sector. Pinkerton believed in discipline, in organized pursuit, for only patience and precision could unravel webs as tangled as this one. By week's end, fragments began to fall into place. One operative reported seeing the Colonel at a gambling den, meeting with a man known for forging deeds. Another trailed his lieutenants to a riverboat where strongboxes were loaded in the dead of night. Still another overheard whispers of a planned strike against Pinkerton himself, vengeance for the seizure of the ledger. The danger was closing in. Yet Pinkerton did not flinch. He had built his agency on facing dangers others shrank from. One evening, a visitor came unannounced to Pinkerton's office, Charles Duval, McGraw's old associate. His face was drawn, his eyes restless. "Pinkerton," he said, "I cannot remain silent. Merrick may rot in jail, but the Colonel plots still. He commands a company of cutthroats, and they mean to strike." Pinkerton motioned for him to sit. "Tell me everything." Duval's hands shook as he spoke. "The Colonel blames you for taking the ledger. He says you've upset the balance. He means to destroy you, even if it takes half the city with you. His men gather at Dockside Warehouse number 9. Tonight. I barely escaped their suspicion to bring you word." Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. "Why betray him now?" Duval's voice broke. "Because McGraw's blood is on my conscience. I helped arrange the meeting with the Colonel. I thought it was business, nothing more. When Silas fell dead, I knew I had been a pawn. I want no part of this madness." Pinkerton studied him, searching for deceit, but found only desperation. "Then you will aid us in ending it," he said. That night, under a moon veiled by clouds, Pinkerton led his men to the docks. The air smelled of tar and river mud. Warehouse number 9 loomed silent, its windows dark, though muffled voices echoed within. Pinkerton signaled his men into position. Through a crack in the door, he saw the Colonel standing tall before a crowd of ruffians, his cane raised like a general's sword. "Merrick is lost," the Colonel was saying, his voice carrying even in the muffled gloom. "But we need no politicians. We rule with coin and steel. And if Pinkerton believes he can unmake us, let him come. Tonight we remind him whose city this is." The men cheered, fists pounding crates. Pinkerton stepped inside, revolver drawn, his voice cutting through the roar. "Tonight you are reminded that Chicago is not yours to rule, Colonel." Gasps, curses, the scrape of weapons unsheathed. The Colonel's eyes blazed with recognition. "Pinkerton," he bellowed. "You dare!" A shot rang out, one of the Colonel's men firing. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Operatives stormed from every entrance, gunfire flashing, shouts echoing against rafters. Men scattered, some fighting, some fleeing. Pinkerton himself advanced toward the Colonel, who stood unmoved amid the turmoil. He swung his cane, striking Pinkerton's arm with bone-jarring force, sending his revolver clattering to the floor. The Colonel lunged, the silver head of his cane glinting, revealing the hidden blade within. "Die, detective," he roared. But Pinkerton was quicker. He seized a length of rope from a crate and swung it, entangling the colonel's blade arm. With a twist he pulled, unbalancing the larger man. They crashed against crates, locked in brutal struggle. "Your war is over," Pinkerton growled, grappling for control. The colonel snarled, his strength formidable. Yet Pinkerton's resolve was iron. He wrenched the blade free and cast it aside. Bangs rushed forward, revolver leveled. "Yield, Colonel." But the man only laughed, a cold, triumphant sound. He struck Bangs with his free hand, sending him sprawling, then wrenched himself from Pinkerton's grip. With surprising speed, he hurled himself through a side door, vanishing into the night. The warehouse fell silent save for groans of captured men. Several of the colonel's followers lay bound, others sprawled wounded. The operatives secured them swiftly. But the colonel himself had escaped once more. Pinkerton retrieved his revolver, his expression grim. He is a serpent. Strike at the body and he slips away. But every serpent leaves a trail. Among the crates they discovered more evidence, forged deeds, bribe money, letters linking Merrick and the colonel to a dozen schemes. Enough to shatter the council's defenses. Yet without the colonel in chains, the public might believe Merrick acted alone. As dawn tinged the river with grey light, Pinkerton addressed his weary men. "We have cut strands of the web, but the spider lives still. Until he is caught, corruption festers. Rest, then ready yourselves. The colonel will not hide forever." Bangs, nursing his bruised ribs, muttered, "He'll come again, Allan. He cannot abide being bested." Pinkerton's gaze hardened. "Then let him come. I will be waiting." Chapter 6, The Colonel's Gambit. Chicago awoke restless in the days following the raid on Dockside Warehouse No. 9. The newspapers celebrated Allan Pinkerton's triumph over the gangs, printing bold illustrations of bound criminals under headlines like "Pinkerton Strikes Again." But beneath the praise, unease rippled. For while Merrick languished in prison and several conspirators had been captured, the colonel himself remained free. To many, his escape was proof of his cunning, and whispers spread that he would strike back with terrible vengeance. Pinkerton felt the weight of those whispers in his office, where he sat at his desk surrounded by reports. His operatives had scattered through the city, trailing every lead, but the colonel remained elusive. He was too disciplined to linger in familiar haunts, too clever to expose himself to chance. Yet Pinkerton knew men like him could not resist making bold moves to restore their reputation. Pride was their undoing. Word from the river, Bangs reported one morning, entering with rain dripping from his hat brim. "The colonel's men have been seen meeting with freight handlers. Talk of a shipment arriving under false name." Pinkerton leaned back, considering. Coin and power both run along the rails and rivers. If the colonel plots to rebuild, he will strike there. And if so, he risks exposure. Later that afternoon, another operative delivered news more troubling still. A witness claimed the colonel had been seen near City Hall in disguise, meeting with a councilman not yet implicated in the ledger. The implication was clear: the colonel sought new allies among those desperate to preserve their influence. "The serpent seeks a new skin," Pinkerton murmured. "But no skin can hide him forever." That evening, as the city bustled with carriages clattering along muddy streets, Pinkerton attended a gathering at a hotel ballroom under assumed guise. Politicians, businessmen, and military men mingled, drinking and laughing loudly. Among them, Pinkerton's eye caught a figure at the far edge of the room, a tall man leaning on a cane, face half shadowed by the brim of his hat. For a moment their eyes met, and Pinkerton knew. The colonel. But as he pressed forward, weaving through the crowd, the man slipped away into a side corridor. Pinkerton followed swiftly, only to find the passage empty save for a folded card left upon the floor. It bore a single line, written in bold hand. "Meet me at midnight, Union Railyard. Come alone if you dare." Pinkerton studied the words, his jaw tightening. This was a challenge, a gambit meant to lure him into danger. Yet it was also opportunity. The colonel's arrogance betrayed him, he could not resist confrontation. At midnight, the railyard lay cloaked in fog, the looming silhouettes of locomotives like slumbering beasts. Lanterns glowed faintly, casting long shadows across stacks of cargo. Pinkerton walked steadily into the heart of the yard, revolver holstered but hand-ready. From the mist emerged the colonel, cloak sweeping behind him, silver-headed cane gleaming in lantern light. His voice carried clear, mocking. "I knew you'd come, Pinkerton. A man of pride cannot refuse the duel when challenged." "I came for justice," Pinkerton replied, his tone calm, steady. "And to end the blood you spill upon this city." The colonel laughed. "Justice? Do you think your courts will cage me?" Merrick was a fool. He needed politicians, laws, legitimacy. "I need only strength, coin, and fear. And I have all three." He tapped his cane on the ground. From the shadows rose half a dozen armed men, surrounding Pinkerton. The trap had been sprung. Yet Pinkerton had anticipated treachery. From the darkness of the yard came answering movements, his own operatives, stationed in silence, revolvers ready. In an instant the still night erupted with gunfire, shouts, the clash of men struggling among iron tracks. Lanterns toppled, casting wild beams of light across the chaos. Pinkerton advanced toward the colonel himself, ignoring the melee around them. The colonel drew the blade hidden within his cane, its steel glinting wickedly. He slashed with practiced ferocity, forcing Pinkerton back against a stack of crates. "You should have stayed in your office, detective," the colonel snarled. "This yard will be your grave." Pinkerton ducked the thrust, grappling the colonel's arm. They struggled fiercely, strength against strength, neither yielding. Bangs appeared through the fog, revolver raised, but Pinkerton shouted, "No. He is mine." With a sudden twist, Pinkerton wrenched the blade aside and drove his fist into the colonel's jaw. The larger man staggered, yet did not fall. He swung his cane like a club, striking Pinkerton's shoulder. Pain shot through him, but his grip held. Around them, the fight turned in the operative's favor. Several of the colonel's men lay bound, others fled into the mist. But the colonel himself fought with a fury born of pride. He broke free, leaping onto a railcar ladder, scrambling upward. Pinkerton gave chase, hauling himself onto the car roof. Fog swirled, the iron beneath their feet slick with dew. The colonel raised his blade high, his silhouette framed against the lantern glow. "This city belongs to men like me," he roared. "No," Pinkerton answered coldly. "It belongs to the law." Their clash upon the railcar was brutal, fists and steel meeting in furious struggle. At last Pinkerton seized the colonel's wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the ground. With his other hand he struck, driving the man backward. The colonel lost his footing, tumbling from the car roof into the mud below. Operatives swarmed, binding him at last with iron chains. Still he spat defiance, eyes blazing with hatred. "You think you've won, Pinkerton? There will always be men like me, stronger than law, stronger than order. You cannot kill the hunger for power." Pinkerton looked down at him, breathing hard but steady. "Perhaps not. But I can see to it that you never wield it again." The colonel was hauled away, struggling against his bonds, his curses echoing across the foggy railyard. When silence returned, Bangs approached, rubbing at a bruise. "We've got him, Allan." "At last." Pinkerton nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Yes. But mark me, George, the colonel was not merely a criminal. He was a symptom. Merrick, the councilman, the gamblers, the gangs, they are all threads of the same web. Cut one, and another will form. The struggle for justice never ends." He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where dawn's first pale light crept above the smoke-stained skyline. For Pinkerton, victory was never final, but only another step in a long and weary fight. Chapter 7, The Trap at Midnight. The city breathed easier after the railyard battle, yet Pinkerton knew the calm was false. Men spoke boldly of safety in daylight, but at night the old fear returned, the fear of coins passed in secret and justice sold in whispers. The colonel lay shackled in a guarded cell, Merrick languished in jail, and still ominous currents tugged beneath Chicago's surface. Reports confirmed it, a clerk vanished, a policeman flaunted new wealth, a judge's carriage made strange stops at alleys between hearings. "Pieces still moving," Bangs said, tossing notes onto Pinkerton's desk. "They must," Pinkerton replied. "When corruption loses its sword, it reaches for a torch." That afternoon a messenger boy brought a sealed note, "Return the ledger, or your office will be ash by dawn." The handwriting was bold, the same that had lured him to the railyard. Merrick's circle still schemed. Pinkerton studied the paper under lamplight. The fibers carried the faint scent of incense and coal oil. "Written by one who kneels in pews," he murmured. "A chapel makes a fine meeting house, safe from taverniers." Before dusk, an operative reported Judge Horace Wainwright had visited St. Bridget's rectory, then conferred with Captain Hollis Kearney, a police officer infamous for selling his badge. "A dray company on Canal Street hired extra men," the operative added. "Work begins at midnight." Pinkerton nodded grimly. "They think the ledger moves tonight. Then let us provide them a ledger." The plan was simple and sharp. A decoy chest, filled with copied pages dusted with lampblack, would leave the agency at midnight under light guard. Anyone opening it would mark himself with soot. The real ledger would remain hidden with Pinkerton. Night settled heavy with fog. The decoy wagon creaked down Lake Street, lanterns dim. Pinkerton and Bangs took a separate road toward St. Bridget's, the real ledger secure in a satchel beneath his coat. On Lake Street the ambush struck as predicted. Drays blocked the wagon, muffled men swarmed, and Captain Kearney himself barked, "By authority. Seize the evidence." The operatives yielded, playing their part. The raiders fled toward the river, proud of their theft. Meanwhile, Pinkerton and Bangs approached the chapel. A glow showed under the sacristy door. Inside, Judge Wainwright and Edgar Pike, Merrick's lawyer, waited tensely. Pinkerton entered without ceremony. "The night is over," he said flatly. He placed the satchel on the table, showing a book's spine, then stepped back. "Examine it if you must." Greed overpowered caution. Pike snatched the satchel and rifled its pages, smearing soot onto his hands. Wainwright hovered, sweating. Pinkerton's voice was calm. "At dawn you meant to declare this ledger lost. Instead, you will preside over sworn testimony that it was found in your hands. Truth will brand you more surely than any verdict." Bangs opened the door. Operatives entered, revolvers ready. Pike paled, staring at his blackened fingers. Wainwright sagged into his chair. Moments later, Kearney burst in with the stolen chest, his men behind him. He froze at the sight of Pinkerton. Fury flared, and he reached for his pistol. 2 shots rang, striking low, enough to wound, not kill. Kearney collapsed, blood on his sleeve. His men threw down their weapons. Their hands too bore smudges of soot. Pinkerton opened the chest, fanning the false pages. "Here is your triumph," he said coldly. "A trick fit for thieves." The captives were bound. Pike whispered desperately, "You cannot compel a judge." "I compel daylight," Pinkerton answered. "And daylight will not be bribed." At dawn, with prisoners in tow and the true ledger safe beneath his coat, Pinkerton led his men toward the courthouse. Fog lifted, bells rang, and Chicago stirred. The trap had closed. Now the city itself would judge. Chapter 8, Justice in the Dawn. Dawn broke pale and cold over Chicago, its light spilling through courthouse windows like a silent reckoning. Allan Pinkerton stood in the corridor outside the chamber, the weight of the leather ledger heavy in his hands. Within its pages lay not only proof of McGraw's murder, but also the tangled record of bribes, extortion, and betrayal that stained the city's highest offices. Inside, the prisoners waited. Alderman Merrick, once the pride of civic virtue, now slumped in chains, his face ashen. Judge Wainwright, pale and sweating, shifted nervously, as if the very wood of the bench might rise to accuse him. Beside them stood Captain Kearney, arm bandaged, glaring with defiance, and Edgar Pike, the lawyer, whose hands still bore faint stains of soot. The colonel, shackled and bruised from his capture at the railyard, sat silent, his eyes burning with unbowed fury. The chamber filled quickly. Councilmen, journalists, and ordinary citizens crowded shoulder to shoulder. Whispers rippled through the air as the accused were displayed. The people of Chicago had long suspected corruption, but suspicion had never before stood so naked before them. Pinkerton stepped forward when summoned, laying the ledger upon the table with deliberate care. "This book," he said in his clear Scottish brogue, "is no invention. It is the record of transactions made under Silas McGraw's hand, implicating these men and others in schemes of fraud, intimidation, and murder. The death of McGraw was not chance, but conspiracy. And here lies the proof." The prosecutor rose, holding up the ledger. "Each entry here," he declared, "bears initials, sums, dates. Judge Wainwright received bribes for favorable rulings. Captain Kearney accepted coin for shielding criminals. Alderman Merrick orchestrated payments to secure land contracts, all funneled through McGraw's bank. And the colonel," he turned sharply, "served as their enforcer, silencing dissent with fear and violence." Merrick's voice broke from the dock, desperate, "Lies. That book is forged." But Pinkerton produced the torn slip he had found in McGraw's office and matched it to the missing page in the ledger. The edges fit perfectly, the handwriting identical. Gasps filled the chamber. Merrick's last defense crumbled before the evidence. Judge Wainwright tried to rise, but the prosecutor's booming voice silenced him. "And here stands the very man sworn to uphold the law, his robe stained by bribes. Can justice survive such betrayal? Only if we cleanse it now, in full view of the people." The colonel alone seemed unmoved. He leaned forward in his chains, his voice carrying above the murmurs. "You think you've won, Pinkerton? Bind me, hang me, bury me, it matters not. Men like me will always rise. Power does not die with one man." Pinkerton regarded him coolly. "Perhaps. But your pride is your weakness, Colonel. You built your empire upon fear. Today fear breaks, and men see you for what you are, a thug in cloak and cane." The trial was swift, for evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses spoke of Merrick's secret meetings, of Kearney's threats, of Wainwright's rulings bought and sold. Operatives testified to the ambush at the warehouse, the trap at the chapel, the smuggled coins and forged deeds. Piece by piece, the conspiracy was laid bare. By afternoon, the verdict was delivered. Merrick, guilty of conspiracy and fraud. Wainwright, guilty of bribery and perjury. Kearney, guilty of dereliction and extortion. Pike, guilty of aiding criminal enterprise. And the colonel, guilty of murder. The chamber erupted in noise, shouts of triumph, curses, sobs. The condemned were led away, Merrick weeping, Wainwright broken, Kearney silent, Pike muttering prayers. The colonel walked proudly, eyes fixed on Pinkerton, lips curling in a smile that promised vengeance beyond the grave. When silence returned, the prosecutor turned to Pinkerton. "Chicago owes you a debt, sir. Without your diligence, this city would still be blind to the rot within its walls." Pinkerton inclined his head slightly. "I serve only justice. The city owes itself the duty of vigilance, for corruption will return the moment men grow careless." Later that evening, Pinkerton sat in his office, the ledger closed upon his desk. Bangs poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one across. The agency buzzed with subdued triumph, operatives filing reports, clerks copying evidence. Yet amid the satisfaction, Pinkerton's expression remained grave. You do not look like a man who has triumphed, Bangs remarked. Because triumph is fleeting, Pinkerton replied. He tapped the ledger's cover. Today we broke one conspiracy. Tomorrow another may rise. Chicago is young, hungry, restless. Men will always seek power, whether through politics, crime, or both. Our task is endless. Bangs sipped his coffee, nodding. Still, you've set an example. The city knows corruption can be fought. That counts for something. Pinkerton allowed himself the faintest smile. Perhaps. But remember, George, the law is only as strong as those willing to defend it. That is why we exist. Not for glory, not for praise, but because without vigilance, truth will be buried in shadows. Outside, the city settled into evening. Carriages rattled along muddy streets, gas lamps flickered to life, and voices drifted from taverns. Life resumed, indifferent to the great struggle that had played out in its heart. Yet somewhere in those streets, whispers of Pinkerton's victory would grow, stories of how corruption had been unmasked, of how even the mighty had fallen. Pinkerton leaned back in his chair, staring at the darkening window. In the glass he saw his own reflection, lined and weary, yet resolute. He thought of McGraw, whose greed had led him to ruin, of Merrick, whose ambition had destroyed his name, of the Colonel, whose pride had driven him into chains. Each man, in the end, had fallen not by fate but by their own flaws. Men imagine themselves masters of destiny, Pinkerton murmured, half to himself. But more often, they are prisoners of their vices. Bangs glanced at him. And you, Allan? What are you prisoner of? Pinkerton's gaze hardened. Of justice. And I intend to remain its prisoner until my last breath. The room fell quiet save for the scratch of pens and the hiss of gas lamps. Outside, the dawn of a new day promised both hope and danger. For Pinkerton knew well that murder and mystery would forever stalk America's streets, and that his work, like the fog over Chicago, would never truly lift.